From the fantasy armchair, it is the Fantasy TyRant. Hey there, fellow fantasy football freaks. Welcome back to the fantasy armchair. This time, I'm in Nokalula Falls Park in Gadsden, Alabama. Legend has it, the Cherokee Princess Nokalula refused to marry the rich chief that her father picked out for her and chose instead to jump over the falls to her death. Damn. Could you imagine being the guy who she chose death over? I mean, I've been rejected by women plenty of times, but none of them off themselves as far as I know. Anyway, sorry about there not being a Thursday Benches and Bumps. I had an entire episode recorded, in the can, ready for editing, and because Android fucking sucks, long story short, the whole goddamn fucking thing got deleted. All the video, unable to recover. Like, could you imagine spending an entire day working on a project, 16 hours, writing, recording, and then at the end, it all just disappears on you? Are you fans of The Office out there? Yeah, it's kind of like this. It's okay though, I'm gonna save some of those jokes from that episode for later. Let's move on to the rest of the Benches and Bumps for this week. Real quick though, I'm just asking for 10% likes. So look down there, look at the views. Do the likes equal 10% of those views? If not, hit that little thumbs up button for me. I certainly appreciate it. Also, if you haven't already, go ahead and hit subscribe too. We need 700 subscribers before the end of the month. And if you do that, I've got a real nice treat planned for the holiday season. Something I know you'll all really love. But the only way to find out what it is to get us up to 700 subscribers before the end of the month. I know we can do it. Just do it. Thanks. I appreciate that as well. And of course, if you want unlimited one-on-one advice, your own pocket guru, go ahead and hit me up on Patreon. The link is down there in the description. You get unlimited chat advice with me every week, exclusive content, exclusive videos, entries into Grand Prize giveaways, shoutouts, lots of shit. All for less than a trip to Starbucks. Let's not waste any more of your time and get right to the segment that Matthew Berry and his crew only wish they had on their show. That's right, it's time for Benches and Bumps, Benches and Bumps, Benches and Bumps. I'm starting off with my running back bump of the week, Cordero Patterson. But TyRant, the Cowboys are stout against running backs, aren't they? Yeah, but Patterson is no ordinary running back. He's like a Swiss Army knife or gadget bag. And he gets a lot of play as a pass catcher, and that's something that the Cowboys have struggled with, giving up over 20 fantasy points to the likes of Austin Eckler and Devontae Booker. And Patterson also gets downfield, and the Cowboys secondary has been very effective against wide receivers, allowing the 9th most fantasy points to pass catchers. And for Patterson, we gotta talk about him both as a running back and wide receiver, because he can be used in either position. And with Calvin Ridley gone in Atlanta, it's become the Patterson and Pitts show. And I think Patterson is the star of that show. He can be used in so many plays, in so many ways. So, go, gadget back. Give Patterson a bump this week. Other running backs are bumping. Hey, Josh Jacobs is finally off the injury report this week. Yeah, he's played most weeks, but he always seems to be on the report. Point is, he's fully healthy right now. And he's been pretty solid this season as an RB2, averaging right around 15 fantasy points per game in the games that he's played a full workload, with little fluctuation. He's like the Applebee's of fantasy running backs. Nothing flashy, but you get what you expect and leave satisfied. And Kansas City can definitely accommodate. Take a look at this. Yeah, see, other than last week, the Chiefs are giving up about what you'd expect from each guy. And for Jacobs, I expect around 15 fantasy points, but his potential to flirt with RB1 numbers makes him a pretty good start this week. A solid RB2 play with upside, so give him a bump to your starting lineup. And we all knew that Javonte Williams would eventually get more touches in this offense as the season progressed, but what we didn't see coming is that this hasn't affected Melvin Gordon at all. Last week, both running backs had their highest touch totals of the season, combining for 38 carries. And both running backs had decent games against the Cowboys, who are actually pretty good against running backs most of the time. Williams rushed 17 times for 111 yards, and Gordon had 20 carries for 80 yards and a touchdown. This week, they get the Eagles in a much better matchup. Expect them to leave it all out on the field against Philly just before the Broncos bye in Week 11. I'd say that both running backs are worth a flex consideration this week, so bump them up if you need help at the flex. Got a sleeper here. Zach Moss is still in the concussion protocol. He's had some limited practice, but if he doesn't make it through all the steps of protocol, he won't be playing Sunday. Right now, he's on step 4, which is non-contact, limited practice. With 2 steps to go, that doesn't bode well for his status this week, which means Devin Singletary could see a workhorse level of touches this week against the New York Jets D, who are as effective at containing the run as a Band-Aid is at containing a shotgun wound. That could boost Singletary up to RB2 numbers at least. The Jets are allowing the most fantasy points on the season of running backs, so Singletary is a great flex play if Moss is out this week. Alright, now what about the benches at running back? I'm sitting Michael Carter on my pine this week. Despite all other analysts telling you to start Michael Carter last week, I was telling you that he's a bench. I was right then, and I'm right now. The Buffalo Bills aren't exactly letting guys run all over them. They've only allowed 685 rushing yards on the season. That's the 3rd least in the NFL. And that reflects where they're at in fantasy, because they're actually giving up the least fantasy points to opposing running backs. That's no good for Carter. Plus, Ty Johnson keeps stealing touches away from him. And this week, they get Kevin Coleman back in the mix. Well, I don't think Michael Carter is going backwards in the depth chart, and he'll remain the number 1 guy in the backfield for the Jets. This week, they're going to need those change of pace guys a little bit more than usual to try to contend with that stout Bills run D. After the Bills lost last week against the Jags in a performance more embarrassing than taking your own sister to the prom. Although, I am in Alabama, so, Anyway, the Bills are going to be bloodthirsty this week, and that offense is going to put up points in a hurry, forcing the Jets defense to move away from the run, likely abandoning it by the second half. Carter's going to see better days and better matchups, but this week, you're best off leaving him on your bench. Other running backs I'm benching. Now, Antonio Gibson may be the biggest RB bust of the season, but it's not entirely his fault. The Washington defense is not who we thought they were.
They are who we thought they were!
No, Coach Green, they aren't. And their dismal play has forced the Washington Football Club squad organization to turn away from the traditional run, and that's hurting Gibson's production big time. Not to mention poor play at the QB position and just, all around. Because everyone, me included, thought they were going to be solid this season, and that Gibson, McLaurin, and the defense were elite. Guess we screwed the proverbial pooch on that one. Gibson's been bad this season, and don't think that's going to turn around this week against Tampa Bay, who are a top 10 defense against fantasy running backs. Is Gibson capable of a good game? Yeah, he is, but predicting when that's going to be has been proven impossible, so if you've got other options, go with them and leave Antonio Gibson on your bench. Is there going to be a Patriots running back who puts up usable fantasy numbers on Sunday? Most likely, yeah. But trying to figure out who that'll be is like trying to figure out which chocolate in the box is filled with toffee instead of laxative. Is the reward really worth the risk? Damian Harris has been the most reliable, but with only 2 games over 14 fantasy points and 3 games under 10. That's like saying your McDonald's has the most reliable shake machine, and he and Stevenson are both still in concussion protocol, so we're not even sure if they're gonna play or not. If neither of them goes, Brandon Bolden would be the guy, but JJ Taylor could sneak some of that production away. And if that doesn't sound fucked up enough, even Jonnu Smith is on standby to take some totes this week. It's just a mess in that backfield right now. Plus, the Pats play the Browns, who are surrendering the 7th fewest fantasy points to running backs. So no sense trying to figure this all out, just leave the Pats backs on your bench. Bust alert, DeAndre Swift's been a low-end RB1 play all season, and most of the time, playing him has paid off. This week, though, he may not fare so well. The Steelers are the 3rd best defense at stopping running backs in fantasy, allowing over 10 fantasy points apiece to Joe Mixon, Aaron Jones, and David Montgomery. His fantasy point production has been a bit volatile this season, going from his highest total of the season in Week 7 at 28.4 fantasy points to his lowest point total in Week 8 at 8.1. He's always capable of going off, but just as likely at putting up a dud, and I ain't betting on him in a bad matchup. Most likely, he's in your lineup if you have him. But don't be surprised if DeAndre's looking not so swift and more DeAndre sluggish on Sunday. Alright, now what about the wide receivers? Well, this week, I'm bumping up A.J. Brown. Now, I haven't been too kind to the Titans' offense this season. Less kind than other analysts, that's for sure. And for good reason. They've been, overall, underwhelming. So when I recommend someone from the Titans, you better listen, like I'm giving you a stock tip from E.F. Hutton. And if you get that reference, put down the Geritol, turn off the Matlock, and crank up your hearing aid, because it's time to listen up. Saints are allowing the 4th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers this season, and the Titans will be enjoying some home cooking on Sunday. Brown tends to play pretty well at home this season, and Julio Jones is going to be banged up, if not out for this game. Now he might play, but more likely as a decoy, freeing up A.J. Brown on the outside. Brown could go yard for a couple touchdowns as a result. With the Titans needing to rely on the pass game with King Henry out, the pass catchers will benefit, and as Tannehill's main man, A.J. Brown's going to benefit most of all. I expect a big game from Brown, so give him a big bump this week. Other wide receivers I'm bumping up. Michael Pittman is bordering on Studville this season. I was all over him last season and in the preseason, saying that he could be the breakout wide receiver of the year. And I think he's an excellent candidate, if not an absolute lock for that designation at this point. He's hit double-digit fantasy points in all but 2 weeks this season, and is averaging over 16 fantasy points per game in PPR, making him the wide receiver 16 on the season. And the Jaguars haven't done a lot to stop the pass, allowing the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Pittman and his QB Carson Wentz have had a blooming bromance this season, and I think that continues, despite T.Y. Hilton's best efforts to take some of Carson's attention for himself. Pittman will be a wide receiver 2 with upside this week, so do yourself a favor and give him the bump this week. The departure of Ruggs left a big-ass hole in the wide receiver core, and while I think a combination of Bryan Edwards and newly acquired veteran receiver Deshaun Jackson will do a lot to fill that hole, Renfro, who happens to be Derek Carr's favorite target, as he stated several times in public as if he thrives on alienating his wide receivers, Renfro seems to be set up for an uptick in production as well. He tied his highest totals and targets as well as receptions last week, resulting in his second best game in terms of fantasy production on the season. He's been a solid flex play all season, and his wide receiver 2 upside is starting to show. The Chiefs have been a lot more vulnerable to the run in the past, but I expect the Chiefs to step up their game in a heated division rivalry this week, which means Carr is going to have to throw. And of course he's going to throw to his beloved Hunter Renfro. Dude, it's like being a parent. Sure, you've got a favorite kid, but you don't let them all know that. Anyway, because you know Carr will, bump Hunter up this week. Got a sleeper for ya? Now, I had Russell Gage on my top 10 waiver wire targets earlier this week. Click that little link right up there if you missed it. But he's still only 22% rostered.
That is absurd.
He's technically the wide receiver 1 for the Falcons, even though we know that Cordero Patterson's been the number 1, well, everything for the team, as absolutely nobody predicted. And Russell Gage is competing for the number 2 spot with rookie tight end Kyle Pitts. In the weeks Gage has been featured in the offense though, he's averaging over 10 fantasy points per game, and recently, since Ridley's been out, that's jumped up to right around 15. I see that level of production continuing this week against the fantasy fiesta of Dallas, who are in the bottom 10 at defending against wide receivers in fantasy. If you're looking for a solid start in deeper leagues, or you need a fill-in at the flex this week, Gage may be your guy. And what about the wide receivers I'm benching? I'm putting Cortland Sutton on the pine this week, and I'll tell you why. When Jerry Jeudy came back, we all expected it would be Tim Patrick taking the back seat for him, but it's Cortland Sutton that's taking the biggest hit, it seems. Jerry Jeudy's been the man, and Patrick has been the number 2, and that's made Sutton into a third wheel. And with Noah Fant coming back off COVID protocol, I don't see Sutton taking back a lot of his lost targets this week. The Eagles' D doesn't give up a lot to wide receivers, only the 4th fewest fantasy points to the position. Now Sutton was the top guy in that offense, but he got Wally Pitt twice. Tough break, man. Kinda reminds me of Bart Simpson, you know? Because when that show began, it was all about Bart. You could tell because that's what old people called it. Oh, that damn Bart Simpson show! But as time moved on, Bart moved lower and lower down the totem pole. Homer became the star, so now old guys were like, oh, that dang Homer Simpson show! And then Lisa got more attention. Even Ralph Wiggum leapfrogged Bart. Okay, it's a stretch, but you get the picture. Sutton is old news. Ay caramba! Leave him on your bench. Other wide receivers I'm benching. Last week, I told you all to start Elijah Moore in the Thursday night game, and if you listened, you were rewarded with a breakout performance and over 27 fantasy points in PPR. This week, I'm telling you to sit him if you can afford to. Corey Davis is coming back this week, and that will certainly cut into Moore's target share. Couple that with the fact that the Bills D are only allowing 10.9 fantasy points per game to running backs on the season. Good enough for best in the league, so I'm staying away from the Jets receivers this week. Mike White has been talking shit all week about how he should have been the number 1 pick, but he's about to get a wake-up call, courtesy of the Bills. Big White Hope? more like big white hype, and I ain't buying it this week. If Moore puts up a good game here, I'm gonna anoint him an unsittable stud, but I really don't see that happening. I'm thinking you probably have better options this week, so if you do, leave Elijah Moore on your bench. Last week I was telling everyone to start Kirk, and he scored over 16 fantasy points. That was against the 49ers, and in a week where there's no DeAndre Hopkins or AJ Green. Both of them could be back this week, and while we're uncertain about the return of Kyler Murray, who appears to be a full-blown game-time decision, regardless of who's throwing the ball, it'll be against the Panthers D, who are only allowing 17 combined fantasy points to wide receivers each week. And 17 points, with all those mouths to feed, is like trying to feed a family of 6 with a small pizza. Sorry, I'm writing this during dinner time, but I think the analogy is spot on. Christian Kirk goes back to number 3 in the pecking order at best. Now, if you excuse me, I think I'm gonna go order a pizza. And, oh yeah, put Kirk on your bench. Bust alert. Yeah, I know you're all excited that Russ Wilson's coming back to cook. And yeah, you've got reason to be excited. And while I don't think you can afford to sit Tyler Lockett this week, don't be surprised if the fantasy gods pop a squat in your face. Rarely has Wilson evenly distributed the ball between his 2 main targets, typically focusing on one over the other. And this week, Lockett could face a lot of Darnell Savage in the slot, who's been really heating up this season. The Packers as a whole are only giving up the 6th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, and this week they'll be playing at home in what could be a sloppy field with a mix of snow and rain in the forecast. Again, I'm not saying you sit Lockett necessarily, but I feel like this is going to be a Metcalf week. So use that as a guide if you're trying to decide between Lockett and another guy in your squad this week. Let's move on to the quarterbacks. And one quarterback I'm bumping up this week is Matt Ryan. Up until last week, Matt Ryan was a matchup-based quarterback, and his matchup against the Saints wasn't that good, but he still managed to put up his highest fantasy point total of the season. And this week, he's got a much better matchup against the fantasy fiesta that is the Dallas Cowboys D, and they're giving up the 6th most fantasy points for opposing quarterbacks. But let's strike the iron while it's hot. Dallas just allowed over 20 fantasy points to Teddy Bridgewater. They haven't faced an elite QB since week 3, and yet they're still giving it up like an aspiring actress on a Hollywood casting couch. Matty Ice will stay on fire, which makes no sense unless he's like methane ice, which actually burns a flame over 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, almost twice the top temperature of a gasoline flame. So yeah, we'll go with that. Did you expect a science lesson on this show? No, you didn't. But I bring it all. Math, science, philosophy, and oh yeah, fantasy football too. Like this. Bump up Matty Ice to your starting lineup this week. Another quarterback I'm bumping up. So I didn't do mixed notes this past week, but I'm bringing it back for week 11. For those of you who've been keeping up on it, you know that as an ending for every show, I was saying whether or not we'd see famous Jameis or heinous Jameis that week. And I had a near perfect record going until he went down for the season with a knee injury, so I needed a replacement segment to end the show with. And after much feedback from all of you, I decided to go with Wentz or Wins. And if I had done mixed notes this week, I would have said Wentz, not Wentz. I think that Carson puts away the cavalcade of crap and has a viable fantasy week against the purring pussycats of Duval. The Jagoffs are weak against NFL football teams in pretty much every way and can definitely be had by opposing QBs, giving up the 12th most fantasy points to the position. Wentz has been hooking up with Pittman all season, and with T.Y. Hilton coming back, I see Carson Wentz putting the pussycats on their backs. He's put up over 20 fantasy points in 4 out of the last 5 weeks, and I think he does it again this week in an easy matchup, so give Wentz a bump this week. And my sleeper at quarterback this week, hey, it's the OG Tom Brady against the new Tom Brady. Yeah, just kidding, of course. But what's no joke is Taylor Heineke's potential fantasy output in this game. It's true he's been inconsistent, but he has put together some fantasy viable performances, and with the threat of Ryan Fitzpatrick's return looming over his head, this may be Taylor's last chance to make a case for himself as a starting NFL QB. And what better opportunity than to outshine against the legend he's been jokingly compared to? What delicious irony that would be. I don't know if this is much of a sleeper pick, as it is an oh my god, that'd be fucking hilariously awesome pick. But the Bucs D does surrender the 9th most fantasy points to opposing QBs, and Taylor Heineke has scored over 20 fantasy points in 4 out of 7 starts. So it's not exactly like going out on a limb to say that I think that he could have a good game and that he has sleeper potential as a QB this week. No punchline here, it's the truth. Yeah, you think that's funny? Well, when Heineke puts up a top 15 performance this week, we'll see who's laughing then. So those are the bumps. But what about the benches? Captain Kirk has been a top 10 QB in fantasy this season, just as I and pretty much no other analyst predicted in the preseason. And I've been boldly telling you all to start him in many games this season, and that's paid off most of the time. This week, though, I think it might be safer to go with other options. The Chargers have only allowed Patrick Mahomes and Baker Mayfield to go over 20 fantasy points this season, with no one else even reaching the 17 fantasy point mark. And that includes a sub 14 point game from Lamar Jackson and a sub 10 point game from Dak Prescott. Even with Kirk Cousins having the odd distinction of playing better on the road this season, I think the Chargers need to keep him at bay while they struggle with Dalvin Cook, who's going to be running his ass out there on the field trying to prove his innocence while balling out in this game. I expect a lot of success running, but not a lot of success in the pass game. The Chargers are the fourth best team in the league at preventing fantasy points from opposing QBs. So Scotty ain't beaming you up a win this week if you start Captain Kirk, so leave him in the brig, on your bench. Now it's been said that getting rid of Odell Beckham is addition by subtraction, and time has proven that to be true for the Browns offense. With all his other wide receivers happy and getting attention, Baker Mayfield and the crew are looking well in that offense. Other than the running back injuries, of course. But in the passing game, things are starting to settle in, and the team is gelling. Problem is, they still aren't throwing enough, or at least well enough, to make Baker a fantasy viable QB. He's only had one game over 20 fantasy points, but I still get a lot of questions about him, like starting him over Wentz or Ryan. The answer is no, especially this week against the Patriots, who are top 5 at defending against fantasy QBs. Even in 2 QB leagues, unless it's a deep league, I see no reason to start Baker Mayfield this week or any week. Yeah, his commercials are fun to watch, but his QB play sucks, so leave him on your bench. Bust alert. Ever since the Eagles coaches have vowed to turn to a more traditional run game, Jalen Hurts' fantasy production has plummeted faster than Aaron Rodgers' recent jersey sales. After not having a game below 21 fantasy points all season, Hurts put up totals of just over 11 and 16 points in the past 2 weeks respectively. I was all over this guy at the beginning of the season, but I also told you to pick up a backup who would be on the rise at the end of the season. I actually mentioned Justin Fields, and we're starting to see that prediction come to fruition. Hurts' production is falling, and Fields' production is rising. See, those of you who are new to the fantasy kingdom, you'll benefit with me helping you draft next season. But for this game, you may have to start Hurts and hope for the best. Unless you've got one of my bumps as well at the QB position, or you can get someone good off the waiver. The Denver D is the second best in the league at defending against fantasy QBs, and Hurts isn't using his legs as much as he was earlier in the season, which is what was saving his fantasy days. All in all, this smells like a sit to me if you can manage it. Now he's made it to the tight ends, and my tight end bump of the week is Noah Fant. I was all over this kid in preseason, and he's definitely shown some flair here and there. Alright, sure, his production's been fairly volatile, borderline inconsistent, but he does have a decent connection with Bridgewater, and when the two are actually healthy at the same time, they get some work done. And that's where we are now. They're finally both healthy again, and I see a good game for Noah Fant. And to make things even juicier, the Eagles are giving up the most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. The Eagles D's pretty good against the other positions, but tight end seems to be their Achilles heel, and Fant knows how to run routes and get open, and that works to Teddy's penchant for throwing to the open guy instead of throwing the guy open. I mean, that's really it. What else do you want? Jokes, maybe a pun on his name or something? Like how I think that Noah will be a fantasy asset this week. Or there's no doubt about it, he's gonna be fantastic. Or maybe you want a little prediction, like he's gonna get 2 catches for 2 yards and 2 touchdowns. 2 of everything, just like Noah's Ark. Noah's fantasy point arc. Anyway, I don't know. Write any joke you want, I don't care. Just bump Noah Fant up to your starting squad as you do it. Another tight end I'm bumping up. I had Dan Arnold as a bench last week, and in a bad matchup, he still put up 10 points. This week, he's got a good matchup, and like I said earlier in the week, it's obvious they plan to use this guy in the offense a whole hell of a lot. He's becoming a security blanket for Trevor Lawrence, and these two can grow together into an awesome tandem. No, I'm not saying they're gonna be the next Brady and Gronk or even Mahomes and Kelsey, but this week, against Indy, they could play the part as the Colts are allowing the 5th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends, allowing double-digit fantasy points to such tight end legends as Ryan Griffin, Jeff Swaim, Gerald Everett, and even Mike Goose Eggy. You like that one? It was either that or Mike Gesicki. I'll let you decide. Anyway, we ain't talking about the who's who of tight ends, more like the who cares. The point is, the Colts suck at defending the tight end position, and Dan Arnold has been useful in fantasy since being traded to the Jags, so give him a bump to your tight end spot this week. And my sleeper at tight end is Ricky Seals-Jones. Logan Thomas is likely to be back next week, so much like his QB Taylor Heineke, this could be the last week of viable fantasy production for RSJ. It's been fun while it's lasted, but all good things must come to an end. Like I just watched the last episode of the first season of Squid Game. Nah, I'm not gonna spoil anything, but wow, you just gotta watch that show. It's fucking nuts. And it's gonna be a while before the next season, but so much is left unanswered. And that's how I feel about Seals-Jones. This is likely it for him for this fantasy season, and we're gonna have to wait until next season to see where he ends up and see if he'll be able to carve out a role that'll allow him to maintain fantasy viability. But that's next season. But he's still got this last game this season to prove his worth. And the Buccaneers D is the 8th worst at defending against fantasy tight ends. And RSJ has fared well in plus matchups. So he could go out with a bang and make that case for himself to get a payday in free agency next season. Fantasy football is a lot like Squid Game, because you gotta take risks to get ahead. But the risks have to be calculated and well executed, or you could end up being eliminated. If you need help at the tight end position, take a chance on RSJ and stave off elimination. So finally we reached the benches for the tight ends this week, and here's a familiar name. Tyler Higbee. Well, looks like he avoided elimination from this segment by putting up a 10-point game last week. So now I'm still getting questions about him. I just don't think he's very good. Too many mouths to feed in that offense, especially with OBJ crashing the party now. Higbee doesn't have a solid rapport with Stafford, and he just hasn't been utilized in that offense. Even in a game where he got 10 targets, he only managed 10 fantasy points. PPR, that ain't no good. You know what? Screw it. Let's be real here. Tyler Higbee's a dumb name, he looks like an asshole, and he plays like a little bitch. And against a top 10 team versus tight ends in fantasy, I bet he don't do shit. So trade him, drop him, do what you gotta do. I don't give a fuck. But if you hold on to him, you better leave him on your bench. Another tight end I'm benching. Earlier in the season, Hunter Henry was Mac Jones' go-to guy, but now Jones has gotten more comfortable with all of his pass catchers and is spreading it around as the Patriots are known to do. That's why starting pass players is more frustrating than trying to do calculus on mushrooms. It's too hard to manage, and why should you care? There's trees that need hugs and better players to start, so do that instead. Besides, Henry's seen only 6 combined targets in his last 2 games, and the Browns defense has allowed just 4 touchdowns to tight ends on the year. Plus, they've allowed only 2 players at the position to score more than 13 fantasy points against them. Now, I may be no math whiz, but I ain't on shrooms either at the moment, so I can tell you that adds up to a no-go for Henry in my lineup. Sit him if you can, man. So that's it, fantasy football freaks. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thanks for letting me help you crush your league this week. Thanks also for hitting subscribe, hitting the like button, hitting that bell so you get notified when my shows drop. And don't forget, if we hit 700 subscribers by the end of the month, I'll have a special treat for you all in December. It's a big one too, so you don't want to miss out. So hit subscribe if you haven't already. Check me out on Patreon down there in the link if you want one-on-one advice and all that. And don't forget to come see me tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 11:30 a.m. Eastern for the Tinker Stinker Power Hour. Let me help you set your lineup while you're doing your morning business. I'll have bonus deep sleepers, my double deep danger dive of the week, up-to-the-minute injury updates, weather reports, streaming defenses, streaming kickers, plus answers to all your burning questions. That's the Tinker Stinker Power Hour tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 11:30 a.m. Eastern. So anyway, good luck to you all this week. Hopefully this video helps, and hopefully I help you even more tomorrow morning. Until then, I'm out. Peace.